Common Council Administration Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Today is September 4th, 2018. And so the first thing on our agenda, Councilor Shevlot and Councilor Williams, the first thing on our agenda today is proposal number 11, which is amending the 2018 budget as approved by the Common Council with respect to the general fund. Yep. Yeah, it wasn't in the packet of this week. That's why I had to pull. So if I could invite Mr. Fenwick up to discuss.
Good evening.
Hello.
I don't know if this is on or not. It doesn't sound like it is, but this proposal is requesting an additional appropriation in the amount of $60,000 into the general fund and in particular into the communications budget. The reason for the request is we had 3 employees either retire or leave that department this year, and the requested additional appropriation is the amount of the accrued leave we had to pay those employees upon their separation from the city. So that's the purpose of this request.
Councilors, do you have any questions?
So, Councilor, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So, Mr. Fenwick, so this request is to add to the communications budget of $60,000. So is that in anticipation for more people leaving? And what is so the accumulation for the 3 employees equates to $60,000.
Correct.
So we're adding to the budget.
Correct.
Instead of just, one-time payment from the general fund to pay the employees. That's where I'm not.
When we budget, and as we have the last 2 years, we've asked all department heads to the best of their knowledge, do you know of any employees who are planning on retiring primarily? Now, employees aren't obligated to let us know if they are or not. So those that we do know, if there's a known retirement, we have been budgeting funds in anticipation of these payouts. In this particular department's budget, we were not expecting 3 separations, if you will. So the funds were not budgeted for these payouts in this particular department. So if we do nothing, we will run short by the end of the year on paying just salaries to individuals in that department.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, Councilor Schiller.
So based on what you know, and we have your proposed budget in front of us, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of conversations about that, given that we didn't set up this fund last year to address this very issue, does this budget accrue, or do you have an idea about getting, from your department heads, getting back of approximately what might be needed for retired employees in 2019?
In our 2019 proposed budget, yes. We have budgeted funds in anticipation of what known retirements, or at least those that primarily in police and fire, if they've signed up for the drop, it effectively doesn't guarantee they're retiring, but it's a good probability they will. So we have addressed those in the 2019 budget. Okay. The difficult part is you just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have somebody wake up on January 2nd and say, I've had enough, I'm out of here, and they didn't think that, today on September 4th. And so those that we're reasonably confident, yes, we've budgeted for those.
Okay. I had a question for you. So that we don't kind of get into this, I mean, can you kind of talk to me about where our liability kind of is right now? So we don't have to keep coming back and trying to figure out what we're going to do with this.
So behind you is kind of an overview of that. So this first page That first comparison on the left, the blue and the red bars, that is showing the total liability citywide. So if every employee left today, which obviously isn't going to happen, but what we owe in earned but unpaid leave as of June 1st of this year is $4.7 million. That's the red bar on the left. And last year that number was $4.3 million. So a couple of other comparison points. The next comparison to the right of that is employees who currently have 20 years of service and therefore could be eligible for retirement. That number as of June 1st is $2.2 million. Moving one comparison over to the right, employees who will have 20 years of service over the next 2 years, that number jumps to $2.8 million is what our current liability is. And then on the far right, which quite frankly is the number that most concerns me, is over the next 5 years, employees who will at least have 20 years of service and therefore potentially could retire, our liability is $3.9 million. Those are real numbers. We get 5 or 6 in a particular department in 1 year. That's going to have a major impact on our not only budget, but our ability to restaff upon those separations. As I previously mentioned, citywide, that total liability grew by about $400,000 year over year from 2017 to June 1st of this year. And that those employees with 20 years of service over the next 5 years, that number grew by about $500,000 year over year as well. So this is a problem that's not going away. And then the last comparison is, where are these liabilities? 85% of it is within public safety, police and fire. The next biggest liability outside of those two departments is at our utility. I do think we're actually reasonably well equipped to address that at the utility. But for police and fire, and then the next two biggest departments are parks and communications. As we saw this year, we had 3 communications employees leave, and it created a pretty big impact on that budget. So those are the 4 real areas of concern in the city, but primarily it's a police and fire challenge.
Okay, so Mr. Fenwick, in discussing this, one of the questions I have related to police and fire, we did their union contract last year. So how does, I know we're kind of not talking about the Leave Act, but I think all the counselors are, the new leave ordinance, I think all the counselors are aware of it. So how would that affect police and fire to kind of, affect this number?
So what the leave ordinance proposal, which is being introduced tonight, will do is draw a line in the sand and say new city employees 20 years from now will not put the city in a position where we owe, on the high side, potentially $150,000 if they decide to leave. So we're drawing a line in the sand and saying, you know what, we have this liability now. We're going to try to manage to get our hands on this liability, but we're not going to allow it to continue to grow in perpetuity. As we hire new employees, they will not be able to accrue the leave that has been to this point.
This will also affect police and fire. I mean, when you say city employees, new hires, across the board.
Correct.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
so we're talking about proposal number 11, correct?
Yes.
So, in the proposed new budget, that $60,000, I see that there was an increase. Maybe my eyes deceived me for the proposed new budget for communications, et cetera.
That's correct.
And so this would be an additional $60,000.
In this year's budget, correct.
Okay.
It wouldn't necessarily have to be carried forward in the communications budget every year beyond this year, because we simply had 3 separations in that department that cost us that amount. We could have 0 next year and therefore would not need at least funds in this particular case to pay for that.
So this $60,000, so the $60,000 has already been paid out.
We've already paid these 3 employees,
Okay.
correct?
So this is $60,000 to increase the budget is for salaries and et cetera?
It's effectively to pay the department back for having paid them already. Because when they left, we had an obligation to pay them. We had no choice but to pay them. So if, from a budgetary standpoint, we're absolutely fine because we're only on September 4th. But by the time we get into November, that particular budget will run out of dollars available to pay salaries because of the 60,000.
In just that line item for salaries or in the entire department budget?
Per budgeting rules, we budget at the department level, but then within the department, there's salaries, personal services,
Right.
supplies, other services and charges, and capital. We cannot exceed what the council adopted in each of those 4 categories.
Right.
So if we do nothing, we will either overspend or have to lay off, 5 or 6 employees in November until January because we are out of appropriation in the personal services category of that budget.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fenwick.
All right, councilors, can we go ahead and call for a recommendation?
Make a
Can I get
motion. Motion to full council for approval.
All right. We don't have to have a second on that, just a motion. Or do they a second? All right.
You can second.
Yeah, I'll second it. All right, so it's been motion's been moved and seconded. All in favor, show by a show of hands. Opposed? Motion carries 2-1. Thank you.
Thanks.
That end the meeting.
All righty.
All right, so now we got